Hello everyone. Hopefully everyone is having a decent Saturday. As you can see, we have the puzzle of the day. I will give you some time to solve this while I make sure everything is working on the technical level of things. But yeah, clearly we have some attack against the king on the Okay, I think it is. Everything's working. Ugh, there we go. Okay, so assuming everything is not lagging, so this king is unsafe, but at the same time white does have some extreme counterplay going on over here. Obviously you give white two tempos, something like rook e8, a8, queen, and you're essentially busted as black. So you have to do something quick. That translates to moves like rook f2 and rook a1. Those are the only two checks in this position. You can't check with the knight. You obviously can't check with the king. So it has to be the rook it has to be with the rook. Sorry. And well, you quickly realize that after rook a1, king g2, there's nothing. And it would be good discipline to continue calculating in that direction for a little bit longer. I would say like 30 seconds more. At least that's what it took me approximately. But then I realized that there's nothing. At least I stopped. Maybe I wasn't completely sure. You're never completely confident that there's nothing, right? But there is something that helps a lot when you're solving, and that is that when you calculate something else, and that actually looks promising, you can be more confident about something being more promising than the other move, in this case rook a1, being not promising, if you know what I mean. It's easier to reject a certain line just because there's a better one. And in this case, rook f2 is just better than rook a1. In fact, probably the only way, given that we know this is a puzzle. Rook f2, that allows white only gives white two options, sorry. King e1 or king g1. If king e1, there's knight d3, king d1 and rook d2, a very common pattern if there's a rook and a knight teaming up against a king against the corner. And obviously the rook is somehow defended, in this case by the king. That's always going to be checkmate. And against rook f2, king g1, there's knight f3, and this pattern is even more typical, where the knight on f3 is diagonal, only one square in between to the king, and the rook could be either on g1 or on h2, and it's going to be mate. So rook f2 is the winning move. Not knight f3 here, sorry. King g1, knight f3 would have been the winning move, but here we go the other way. Pretty nice symmetry, and we are winning. Hello Ante. So we're gonna play 10+0. Let's join the arena. Everything's working. Yep. There's a bullet arena going on in 40 minutes. So I'm not going to play that. We're going to stick to quality chess. It's fun to play bullet, and there's time for that as well, but not today. And actually not anytime soon for me, at least. But I'm quite sure other streamers are going to stream that. Okay, we're playing with the black pieces. Good luck to Polkovnik. And I'm expecting some Philidors and some reverse Philidors with white, or even delayed Alapins, depending. Okay, my opponent's not going to make any move. Unfortunate. So let's go back to the tournament. Surprisingly enough, that counts as a 2-point win, where in reality we didn't do anything, so yeah. Let's see who's the destroyer. It seems like whoever is playing... you can't see that board. Okay. Well, it doesn't really matter. Turkey. Yeah, you get to see the countries. The chess power countries at the very top. Okay, we're playing against Sergey. Good luck, Sergey. They open up with e4. We're going to defend with the Philidor, d6. So what this is doing is This is the beginning of a sequence of moves that is going to create a very solid, very passive, sure. I'm not gonna claim act like the Philidor is not passive. It is passive, but it is very solid as well. It's very difficult to break into it. Now they go for bishop c4, and this is interesting. Every single time we stream, for the last 3 streams at least, this position has happened in game 1 of the streams. The first time it happened, we were black. The second time it happened, we were white. So we were looking at it from this perspective, and now we're black again. So let's just recall our theory, because thank goodness, as we should always, we analyze those games. And given that we analyzed those games, we know what to do. So last time I had this position with black, I think I played knight f6, they played d3. This is a very natural way of defending this pawn on e4. They play something like knight c3, maybe that allows some tricks with knight takes c4, and d5, very typical pattern. But yeah, they go d3. And I think what white is going for is some sort of Italian. So bishop c4 is something that you would reply, I mean, okay, with the inclusion of knight f3 and knight c6, you go bishop c4, and that's the Italian. So white is claiming this is some sort of Italian. However, I can reserve the tempo I would usually invest at playing e5, and I can choose to play c6, d5 instead. And this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to play c6. If I'm not mistaken, white already has to play bishop b3, but they play bishop g5, and this is funny. I'm actually wondering if we're playing against the same person, but it's not. This is exactly what my opponent played when we were like 2 streams ago, and you guys can check it out. I'm not bluffing. I'm going to follow it up with d5, and the problem with this is that now white can't keep the tension. Bishop b3 was designed to answer d5 with maybe knight d2, or some way of keeping the tension between these 2 pawns, which is ideal. You don't want to break the tension. But now after d5, you have to break the tension, because if you simply move back, I'm taking on e4. So I'm expecting my opponent to take, and they did take. Now I'm going to take back with a pawn. And now you go bishop b3, and guess what? Black has 2 pawns in the e and the d file, and white only has 1. Meaning, black has more control over the center. So white goes bishop b3. Very natural. I think last time we played this, we either went knight c6 or bishop g4. And I recall playing bishop g4 and being proud about it. Now, what's the logic behind bishop g4? Isn't that just a cheap trick? Attacking the queen? No, I'm not doing it. Okay, I am doing it because it gains a tempo. Not because it attacks the queen and I'm expecting my opponent to not see it. But I'm thinking of playing bishop g4 because it develops with a tempo. I do it without with gaining. White has to defend. That's what developing with a tempo means. And it also does a second thing, which is provoking f3. If white plays f3, their king is going to be weaker, especially if they're planning to castle in the short side. There's a third thing, and that's a little bit more difficult to understand, and that is that, actually it's not difficult to understand at all. I want to play e6 just to support this pawn on d5. So bishop on g5, if you take a look at white's pieces, they may look a little bit weird, but they are doing one thing, and that is putting pressure on d5, either directly, as the bishop on b3 does, or indirectly, as the bishop on g5 does. So after a move like knight c6, knight c3, it becomes clear that I have to do something about this pawn. I either have to defend it with e6 or bishop e6, or I have to advance it, which I don't like either. And that's, as a follow-up thought, as a concluding thought, finally, we get to say, if knight c6, knight c3, I wouldn't want to play e6 right now, because my bishop would be not very happy about that. So I'm going to move this bishop first. If white does something like knight f3, now I play knight c6, and after knight c3, I play e6, and my bishop is happy. This is what we call being outside the pawn chain. So far, it's been exactly the same as the game number 1 of exactly 1 week ago, if I'm not mistaken. You guys can check. It's 2 streams ago. And in that time, I played bishop h5, but we realized that bishop h5 actually allows g4, bishop g6, f4 ideas. And I'm going to go bishop f5 for those reasons. Now against g4, obviously I don't have to go bishop g6, which would directly transpose to the previous line. But I can go, I don't know, bishop e6. You're going to say, David, your bishop is ugly in front of this pawn. But white's kingside is super ugly as well. So I prefer, like, I would rather, it's worth putting my bishop on e6, which is not good for me, but it's even worse for whites to have their pawns that weak. So they play knight e2. So knight e2 is developing. I think knight c6 is a very natural move. e5 now comes to mind. I didn't want to go for e5 before because I thought d5 was weak. But I think e5, knight c3, bishop e6. Okay, yeah, bishop takes f6 I would have to take with the g pawn, double my pawn structure. I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to simply continue with knight c6. Finishing development of knight c3, I'm going to play e6 as advertised. Oh, goodness gracious, sorry about this. My opponent plays e3. That's a little bit difficult to understand. I think my opponent simply wants an escape square for the bishop, but I don't see that as a complete priority. I wasn't threatening, or I wasn't planning to play knight a5 because there's bishop a4 check. So a3 is a little bit of a paranoid move by my opponent. I'm going to play e6. Now d5 is very well protected. Once again, e5 did look very active and very forward thinking. But after knight c3, it's difficult to defend d5. So I went to e6. They go castle short side. Now bishop c5 provoking d4. Is that something I want? I don't think I really want that. I think white is going to play d4 eventually. So I'm not going to allow them to do that with a tempo. I'm going to just kind of say, if you're going to go for d4, do it. But invest one tempo of your own. But bishop c5 would be giving them that move for free. So I'm going to play bishop e7. This is not only developing the bishop, but it's also unpinning this knight on f6. So I'm expecting them to continue with d4 at some point. Very natural move. Okay, they go knight c3. That's another natural move. I'm simply going to castle. I think there is a... You can make a case for moves like h6, g5 and keep your king in the middle, because there's no immediate way in which white can open things up. But it's a little bit difficult to find a pawn break. So for example, g5, g4, I don't know. It looks very unnatural. It's good to kind of keep your options open and be open-minded about these plans, because many times you're going to actually find the right plan. Unless you're like an engine, right? And every single first instinct you have is the right plan. Obviously, that's not the case for anyone, not even Magnus. So it's good to keep your mind open, because when you keep your mind open and you're having this variety and brainstorming of thoughts and plans, it's going to be a certainty, or almost a certainty, that between those plans you're thinking of, the right plan is hiding, you can say. Okay, moving on. Knight g3 is creating the very primitive threat of taking on f5. So I'm going to move my bishop back. And I guess my opponent is going for h4 or h4. Sorry, f4 or h4. They go back, which I completely don't understand. Now they want to go knight f4, I guess. But then it's not like this is definitely not good. Like, white is wasting tempos by going back and forth. How do we punish this? How do we punish this? Okay, so there's h6. That's a useful move. It's simply asking the question to the bishop and simultaneously allowing my king to breathe a little bit more. That's a very deep idea. I don't think it's a priority right now, but I think it's definitely going to be useful maybe in the future. But h6, bishop h4, and then what? What do we do? That's the question. I mean, other moves that come to my mind is a6, b5, just to occupy space in the queen side. How do I come up with these things? Well, first, obviously, it's not like the first thing that comes to my mind. First, I'm trying very exciting moves, like d4, very active, queen b6, check, bishop c5, check. Those are the first thoughts that come to my mind. But after that, now I'm kind of like, if those are kind of not working, for example, bishop c5, d4. Or queen b6, d4 as well. And then I'm like left with my, like, asking myself, what did I achieve there? Answer being nothing. So that's why I'm kind of moving on to the more tame looking a6 or h6 and things like that. Okay, I think I'm gonna go with h6. This does actually a third thing I didn't mention. Obviously, it's asking the question to the bishop. That's the first. So the second thing is it's creating an escape square in the future for future back rank issues. This is no longer going to be the case because the king on h7 is always going to be escaping. And the third thing that I didn't notice is that after knight f4, now I can escape to either... I mean, I could have escaped to f5, but now I have the additional square h7. I don't think that's... I mean, all of these things I don't think are such a big deal. Okay. I wish I could go e5, because then I would have the whole center. But then bishop f6, and I'm losing the pawn on d5. d4 occupies space, but it allows knight e4. So this pawn on d5 is actually keeping that knight controlled. I like that. Knight h5 is trading these two bishops. Do I want that trade? Do I want to trade the dark squared bishops? I don't think I particularly want to do that, so I'm going to play a6, b5. That's my plan. David, what are you going to do after something like a4? Okay, after something like a4, maybe I get additional options. For example, I could... Okay, there we go. Bishop a2. Now, this is where tactics come into hand, because queen b6 would be winning a pawn. And I'm going to speed up here a little bit. So check, and this is taking on b2. I'm just making sure I'm... Ooh, okay, well, this is a mistake. White can play something like bishop f2. If there's bishop e3, and I don't think my queen is escaping. So this was actually a mistake by me. I'm going to play bishop c5. I'm actually ultimately going to exchange the dark square bishops. In this case, not because I want to, just as a response. Okay, bishop d6. By the way, knight a4 would have run into bishop takes f2. I'm going to speed things up. Don't worry, we're going to go through the moves in the post-mortem and the analysis portion of this game, so we won't miss out on the ideas. Now that the pawn on d4, now that the pawn on d3 is on d4, this bishop is attacking c2. Not only that, but this is a semi-open file. So I put my rook here. Take a look. I didn't put the rook on a8 to c8, because I think the one on a8 could potentially be useful after a potential opening up of the a file, especially if white wants to go for b5. Okay, I'm gonna go knight e7 now. I don't have any good reason to take on g3. If anything, I would like my opponent to take on d6, so my queen is a little bit more active on d6. Now I'm gonna put this knight on f5, threatening to... I could have taken on c2, but I'm also threatening to take the bishop here, and knight e3 could be very annoying. Knight e3 can be very annoying. So let's see what my opponent plays. Bishop takes d6, what are we going to take with? Okay, they played that very anti-positional move. I'm going to play b5. Why? Because I thought knight a4 was a little bit annoying. Knight a4, knight c5 was a source of counterplay. So I'm going to stop it as a whole. I think probably knight e3 is much better. And if I could take it back, I would probably do so. My opponent doesn't do anything about it, so I'm going to go knight e3. Thank you, Strjeeper0 something, for subscribing. Now I'm going to take on c2, given that I have two pieces. Well, sorry. One piece defending it. We were winning a pawn, but by white taking, now we're up the exchange. And everything that is left is just conversion. So we're up the exchange plus a pawn. So I'm just going to trade pieces to make my life easier. So knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. I'm attacking the queen, obviously. If my opponent simply moves the queen, I'm going to exchange the knights. So that doesn't avoid exchanging pieces. If my opponent wanted to avoid exchanging pieces, they would have... Yeah, they should have not put the queen there. I'm going to go queen c7, putting pressure on c3. I have rook f3. I have a cool tactic, which is bishop g4. This rook is on f3 is what we call a an overworked piece. That piece is defending f4 and defending c3. So by playing bishop g4, I'm forcing it either to give up the defense of the knight or give up the defense of the pawn, as my opponent chooses, because that's the wiser decision, that's the lesser evil. And we do have 12 seconds, so it's not as if we are free from stress here. There's still a little bit of work to be done. But the more we play, the more material we get. And I think as a very practical choice, I'm going to push this pawn in order to activate this rook. David, you have 10 seconds. Is this enough? Fortunately, I think it should be enough as long as my internet is not very laggy. I think that's the main concern. Bishop takes f5. I'm going to take on c3, kind of to force even more exchanges. Because now, yeah, the only way to kind of keep things alive is bishop d3, but even that doesn't work because then okay. I'm gonna push. I just have to be careful with pre-moves at this point. There we go. They're gonna take on a2. Okay. Queen h1 is made if they move the rook to a neutral square. I think we should be just watching out for... There we go. That's a nicer mate. They only have two legal moves in this position, g4 and h5. The h5 is queen h1 mate, and g4 is what happened in the game. Thank you for the game, Sergey. Let's take a look at that, because there was a lot that wasn't analyzed by us. And I apologize, because that's because I get carried on by the analysis or by the commentating of the game. So bishop c4, knight f6, d3, all of this is pretty standard. We play c6, this is normal. We're trying to go for d5. And they go bishop g5. This is not very good. I'm not sure why people play this. If we take a look at the database, which I recommend any beginner to intermediate player to do, you can see all of these titled players, mostly grandmasters, making moves, the moves that they made in this given position. Of course, it depends on whatever game you're analyzing. It's going to be different every single time. But in this case, we have Artemiev with the white pieces in 2018. And he played bishop b3. So you can compare your openings with those of the very best chess players of the world. And say, okay, well, if they're playing bishop e3, then I probably should as well. But okay, bishop g5, and this is now... There are no games in the Masters database, and that's either because, one, you found a very interesting, innovative novelty, or you're simply making a bad move. And in this case, it's the latter, unfortunately. I played d5, I'm hitting the bishop. Once again, white can't keep the tension with a move like bishop e3 no more, because I'm taking on e4. That's why you go bishop e3, because after something like d5, now you can play e5, for instance. But yeah, we get that, and black is automatically better. And once again, yeah, we remember that because we actually analyzed it from the previous game on the 2 streams ago again. And bishop g4 is the best move. We go bishop f5, although bishop d7 is according to the engine. Okay, it's very similar. Yeah, bishop f5 is absolutely fine. We go knight c6, absolutely fine. e6, and we have absolutely no problems out of the opening. If anything, we're slightly better. This is 0.7. 0.7 is considered to be a better position, clearly better position for black. So they go knight g3, I go bishop g6, they go back. Obviously not very good. Instead of that, white should have played king h1. And after something like a6, once again trying to go for b5, I'm assuming. Yeah. Simply playing something like... Actually, knight g3 is correct, but then going knight ce2, not knight ge2. Maybe that's what my opponent wanted. It was maybe a mouse slip. But knight ce2 would have made more sense here. With the idea of c3, d4, and bring this bishop back. But after knight ge2, white simply wastes a tempo, so that increases black's advantage. I went h6, asking the question. This doesn't change the evaluation of the position. And then I go a6. This is correct, actually. So rook e8, rook c8 were also fine. Very neutral, slow moves. This is not a dynamic position. Our advantage is based on our greater presence in the center. Greater central presence, I should say. And yeah, piece activity, because white's pieces seem to be a little bit more neutralized than mine. Like knight e4 is not possible, right? This bishop is crashing against my structure. And then yeah, I went for queen b6. This was impulsive of me because after queen takes b2, I didn't see bishop b3. This is a very strong move. I saw rook b1, queen takes a3, and I was like, oh, there we go. We're winning a pawn. We're going back home intact. But I didn't see bishop b3. So I had to go bishop c5, and the position before was so good. Not to throw myself too many roses here. But our position previously was strategically so dominating that even by going, like, wasting a couple of tempos or going for the wrong plan, it continues to keep a significant advantage. So yeah, b4 is not a very good move. They should have gone bishop g3 right away, which happened eventually. And yeah, white's moves here are very disconnected. Like, you go b4, rook b1, kind of like saying, look, I'm gonna go for a queenside play. But then you go bishop g3 and then queen e1. Yeah. And our idea was to put pressure along the c file. That's why we put a rook on c8. That's why we moved the knight up back, because we're putting pressure. Now knight f5. This knight is now all of a sudden threatening to come to e3. And yeah, here the position is just collapsing for white, unfortunately. And obviously, maybe it would have been a little bit better. f4 is a very anti-positional move, first of all. But second of all, it would have been definitely better to not sacrifice here and play some like queen d2 right away. Okay, well, thanks for the game, Sergey. Hopefully that was a decent start. Win the tournament. Have you ever won the Daily Rampant? I think I've won it before. But it's a very it's a long tournament, 2 hours and a half. So it's quite quite exhausting. And for a little bit more materialistically, like if I'm gonna participate in a tournament, it's a little bit better if it's like a faster time control and there's like cash prizes and more motivation. In this case, I'm doing it for the love of chess. Okay, we're playing against Bogo Clueden 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're gonna open up with e4. I'm not sure why your comments didn't appear on the chat, Ante, by the way. Okay, we're gonna potentially get a delayed Alapin here. So we're gonna play knight f3. This is the Sicilian. They go for e6, and we're gonna play c3. The delayed Alapin. The normal Alapin would have been to play c3, move 2, but we delay it by playing knight f3 first. And they go for a6. Interesting. So normally people play d5. This is the most natural way of playing. We can take a look at that in the post-mortem. Sorry. Thank you. I'm assuming it's a Slavic username. C takes d4. What do we think about this? Yeah, I think black usually goes d5 here. So breaking the tension doesn't seem like the way to go. I mean, sometimes I'm not anti breaking the tension. It's just, if you're gonna break the tension, you need a good reason. And I failed to see it here. So knight f6, isn't this just running into e5? Or should I simply keep things under control with knight c3? If I go knight c3, I'm a little bit concerned about a move like d5 or bishop b4. Knight c3, let's say bishop b4. I go bishop d3 to defend. e4 once again, because after bishop b4, obviously knight takes e4 is a threat. So bishop d3. And d5, yeah, Yeah, those two moves are interchangeable. Both bishop b4 and d5 are interchangeable. Thank you, Nostalgic Ensemble. That's a cool... e5 94. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm gonna start with bishop d3 then. Because now bishop b4, I get additional options, such as bishop d2 or knight bd2. Maybe not knight bd2, because it's very similar to d5. But we're not gonna get any of that. Black plays d6. Once again, I think black doesn't have a clear plan out of the opening. I think keeping the tension with d5 is better. I think d5 it's not too late for d5 yet. I mean, knight f6 is fine, I think. But yeah, you have to go d5 at some point. I think d6 is a little bit more passive. I mean, it's playable, I guess. This is the Scheveningen structure, as far as I remember. And they want to go for b5 and bishop b7 and keep things very flexible. Okay, I'm gonna castle. Gonna put my king into safety. I'm gonna follow it up with knight c3. Like, just natural moves. Knight c3, rook e1, bishop g5, bishop f4. I'm expecting my opponent to go b5 at some point, but whenever they go b5, I'm gonna go a4, undermining the structure right away. Bishop b7 is a very natural move. Black presumably wants to castle short side as well. They should. So bishop e7, let's start calculating here, because it's a very natural move. So bishop e7, they're going to castle short side. The question that our position, or in this type of positions we face, is what do we do about our center? Sometimes you want to push, but every single time you push, either e5 or d5, obviously you're going to weaken other squares. So very often in this position, you're simply improving your position further and keeping things under control. So rather than white going for one of these pawn breaks, you're actually anticipating black from going for one of those pawn breaks. So for example, e5 obviously is not possible because we take and we're winning a pawn. But d5 is definitely, I think, a little bit more serious. Even though black already wasted a move, it may be the lesser evil to eventually go d5, kind of swallowing your pride, as they say. Swallowing your pride and saying, look, I didn't go d5 right away. I was wrong. Now I see that going for d5 is ultimately correct. So I'm going to do it even though I wasted a tempo. That's kind of what my opponent potentially should be saying. But definitely it's not going to be as decent as before. So I think I'm simply going to play knight c3. So now d5, once again, could be the lesser evil. And what I mean with that is, it could be that obviously black didn't want to go for d5. Sorry, I think I've made my point clear, right? Not wasting a move, not wasting a tempo. But it may still be necessary. That's my second part of the point. So I'm expecting my opponent to castle short side, especially because their last move was bishop e7. And once again, I'm asking myself, should I go for the attack with e5? And I don't think so. I think I allow my opponent to take and play knight d5, for instance. And I don't want to allow some activity to this knight on f6. So what to do? Well, I could potentially just improve my position little by little, play h3. David, why are you playing h3? Because I want to play bishop f4 without being worried about knight h5. With h3, with this pawn in that square, I can play bishop f4, and against knight h5 I have bishop h2. Sounds like a very insignificant detail, but middle static positions and middle games where your plan is very slow burning and it's a very slow paced position is full of those little details. Now they go b6 rather than b5. And I think it's clear now what my opponent is doing. My opponent is going for a hedgehog setup, where they put their bishop on b7, then they put their knight on d7, their queen on c7, rook on c8, rook on d8. The problem, though, is I think this happens more when white doesn't go for the delayed Alapin. So with the pawn on c4, like if this pawn was on c4 rather than on d4, it makes more sense, because there's this weakness on c5. But without that weakness on c5, then, or with this pawn on d4, better said, then out on d7 is always going to be struggling to find a square. So I think that's the main reason. I think there's this confusion by my opponent. If this pawn was on c4, what you're doing is absolutely fine. But with this pawn on d4, things change. We can take a look at it in the post-mortem as always. So now I do want to go for e5, because I see my opponent being a little bit underdeveloped. And after e5, maybe there are going to be tactics around. Around the ideas of, I don't know, knight d5, knight takes d5, bishop e4, or something like that. Now, I was about to play queen e2 because, for example, let's say they castle. Now I play e5, takes, knight d5. Then I can take, and if they take with a queen, I have bishop e4 winning the rook. Hopefully you guys can visualize that. So that would mean that after knight takes d5, they would have to take with the pawn, and that's suboptimal. But I can also simply play h3 and keep things under control with bishop f4, and I think I'm going to do that. Queen e2 is also a very slowly improving type of move that connects rooks in the future and supports e5, supports bishop e4 ideas. But I think I want to prioritize bishop f4 and rook c1. So I'm expecting my opponent to castle or play bishop e7. Interesting. I'm going to continue development with bishop f4. Now e5 is very well anticipated, very well controlled. d5 maybe continues to be a very serious move. But against d5, now with the bishop on b7, you're with the black pieces, you're essentially saying, look, this bishop on b7, it's going to be completely crashing against the structure. It's not going to be very good. So d5, e5, obviously I'm going to play this as a structure of, well, that reminiscent of the French. If the bishop was, I don't know, already exchanged by my light squared bishop or somehow on g6 outside the pawn chain, then sure, like d5 is not as bad. But the bishop would be inside the pawn chain. Okay, they castle short side. I'm going to play rook c1. Putting my rook in the open file, as Bobby Fischer used to say. Whenever you see an open file, occupy it. With a rook, specifically. The knight c6, knight bd7. Yeah, this is... So I think we kind of predicted what my opponent's strategy would be. And that is, they are actually going for the hedgehog setup. But unfortunately, with this pawn on d4 is not that efficient. But let's actually concretely debunk and neutralize and refute this. Because all of these things so far sound very nice. Like I can continue saying, oh look, my opponent got it wrong, my opponent got it wrong. But let me actually break through this semi-fortress that black has set up. So my initial reaction, obviously, when we start thinking about breaking through, is pawn breaks. So e5. But once again, I think knight d5 is the same problem. So I'm going to do something cheeky. I'm going to put my bishop on b1. And now the idea, or one of the ideas, is queen d3, followed by e5. After which, like black can take, it doesn't really matter. Knight d5 and queen h7 mate. So not only that, but the bishop on b1 is nice and snug. as Magnus once said about certain position. This bishop on b1 is ideally placed on b1. If the rook was on a1, then no, because the bishop would be blocking the rook. But thanks to our developing rook move, the bishop on b1 is ideally placed. It's far away. Bishops like being far away. David, your bishops are from, like on the first rank. Isn't that very weak, like very passive, very far away from everything? Well, they're bishops. They're very happy. I mean, look at this monster. It's actually a monster bishop. Look at this diagonal. The same with this bishop on h2. I don't mind putting my bishop on h2 and b1. They're long scope pieces. Now I think I've emphasized on that point for enough. Let me move on to the next thing I wanted to say, but I forgot. It does open the bishop file if he castles. Not sure what you mean. Kind of my fault by reading that message too late. Aren't you pawn hanging? Well, the pawn on e4 is well protected. If I go e5, this is also very well protected. Ah, I see, after queen d3. No. Unless black wants to sacrifice on c3. And that would be a fair argument. Queen d3, rook takes c3. If I take with a pawn, like black is sacrificing the exchange, but they're gaining the pawn on e4. So you know what? I'm gonna take it I'm gonna not allow any counterplay at all. I'm gonna play rook e1. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's on me. But funnily enough, you're like the pawn hanging comment, the last one. That one did have to do with the position somehow. So now I'm preparing queen d3. Once again, if d5, I can go e5. Knight e4 is not even possible anymore. Because before it was just strategically bad. Because the bishop on b7 is no longer scoping at anything. It's crashing against their own structure. But now it would be simply takes, and we're winning a pawn. And probably black is realizing how difficult it is to find play. When the pawn is on c4, black slowly prepares d5. And d5 creates tons of tension. Like if my pawn was on c5, it's not so easy for white to simply go e5 because there's d takes c4, for instance. But with the pawn on d4, that's another reason, right? Like the pawn on d4 is obviously not having any contact with a pawn on d5. So we get to play e5, and that pawn on d4 continues to annoy the life out of this knight on d7. Look. And bishop on c5, for instance. I don't know. Maybe that's taking it to the extreme. Thank you. They go rook e8. Which is a typical hedgehog type of move, trying to go for either bishop f8 or knight f8, redistributing pieces. I think knight f8, knight g6 is a typical maneuver, and actually that's clever because this knight on f8 would be defending h7, as they say. Knight on f8, there's no mate. So for instance, queen d3, maybe knight f8, e5. Actually, two reasons the knight f8 is strong. Firstly, because obviously it's defending h7, but secondly, after knight f8, e5 takes, there's queen takes d3. So clever move. Let's give it to my opponent. Okay, we're running out of time. I'm gonna simply I think I'm gonna simply play queen d3 regardless. They can play knight f8. And I could go for, I think e5, knight takes e5, but I'm not sure. To be a little bit aware of time. You know what? I'm going to expand in the queen side with b4. Expanding the queen side, I'm planning to go for a3. Okay, let's close things off. I'm trying to provoke d5. I think that would greatly... That would allow me to gain more space And let me just focus here for a second. Another idea that I had was to play g4, simply occupying more space. But I don't want to do that too much. If I start occupying too much space, eventually I'm going to realize, oh, wait a second, I've done that way too much. And I have way too much of a responsibility to keep control over that space. As in the Spider-Man. A great power is a great responsibility. So too much space is more responsibility. So there you go, queen d7. I think I'm going to put my bishop on a2 now. Now that this diagonal is a little bit more neutralized. And the idea now is... What is the idea now? I think e5 or d5. That's one of... I'm preparing that. But I'm waiting for the perfect moment. And it hasn't arrived yet. But I'm gonna potentially put my bishop on h2 far away. I could also double in the c file. Okay, let's put our bishop from far away. As I said, bishops are actually happy from far away. And it's gonna speed things are gonna speed up very soon. Because we're both more or less in time trouble. d5, once again, it's the story of it's the whole story of this game actually. d5, I go e5. And I continue putting pressure through space. But actually there's some annoying nuances with d5 this time, because now black gets knight e4. And before I was somehow getting the pawn. Okay. So I'm gonna go queen. Actually, I'm gonna go d5. I think my pieces are reasonably well placed to support this pawn break. So we prepared very... We prepared endlessly, seemingly endlessly. Can you say that? Give me a second. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. I'm multitasking here. I'm gonna play rook d1. Rook d1 is designed to not trade pieces. Why would I want that? I think it's a practical decision more than anything. Here I'm trying to go centralizing pieces, but okay, there we go. My opponent goes 95. I'm not sure if that was completely necessary. Okay, I'm gonna go bishop g3, queen e3, queen b6, rook c1, rook d1, not keep it easy. I'm gonna go bishop b1 now that... And this is mate. There we go. Thank you for the game, Bogo Clued, and that was a very close one. Let's analyze it. So the end was very quick, as it usually is with time trouble. So yeah, my opponent, I don't think you can go for a hedgehog structure, or sorry, hedgehog. I keep saying structure. A hedgehog setup against a pawn on d4. I think it's gonna fail. Things are gonna go wrong, and it is the case. The engine agrees, and I think the engine already goes e5. Yeah, this was the way to properly punish this. D takes e5, d takes e5, knight d5. I wanted to prevent this. I was a little bit too perfectionist, I think. There are several ways of punishing black in this position, but the most the most merciless, sorry, is queen a4, because after bishop d7, there's queen g4. Wow, look at this. So obviously white would want to go queen g4 right away, but they do it in a... Well, because there's a knight on f3. Yeah, this queen maneuver completely escaped me. And it makes tons of sense. Because I say this all the time, the king side is usually defended by a knight on f6. So as soon as that knight is away, the king side becomes weaker. And castle short side is asking for trouble. Queen h3, already threatening mate. So after something like g6... Yeah, this is looking very, very scary. I'm surprised black is surviving, actually. Like I thought this would be forced mate or something. So yeah, I should have gone for e5. But instead I completely, I mean, okay, I approached this in a strategical way. And it's fine, but at some point you have to do something. And I just took too long, I think. And black would have been more or less fine after b5, actually. Actually, not more or less fine. They would have been fine. 0.5, this is just white is better. But no longer completely dominating. So yeah, I was completely oblivious to... I thought I didn't have to do anything. I think that this whole setup with pawn on d4 was bad. In general, so I didn't have to do anything drastic. But I was wrong. It turns out that by playing neutral, slightly improving positions, black actually gets more comfortable. And I thought, once again, I thought that this wouldn't be the case because I thought that black was confusing these structures with those of which were the pawns on c4. So that's on me. That's my fault. Once again, just to kind of conclude this, I should have gone e5 here specifically. Like there are other moves like knight c6 where rook e1 and let's say castles, and there's h3, and this makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, d5 in this case would be strong. So striking in the center is... we shouldn't have taken that long to do that. And let's just go through the kind of sped up part of the game over here. So I play bishop h2 and black actually has it equalized. And I go d5. d5 is correct. Suboptimal way for black. This is not favorable for black. So black shouldn't have gone for this. Now with this pawn is passed, this pawn on d5 is going to be a problem. Now because we're all nervous, I play a nervous move myself, which is knight e4. Trading pieces, this is a typical reaction to being low on time. You try to clear things up and make your position easier to play. So knight e4, I trade pieces, easier to understand what's going on. But that was wrong. I should have played bishop b1 according to the engine. And after e4, queen d4. Interesting. f5, yeah, f5 here would have been good. I was afraid of this. It looks very annoying. Here there was a little bit of more nervous moves. Rook takes c8, queen takes c8, f4 was what the engine suggests. This is what the engine suggests, sorry. But I play rook d1 and then... yeah, this is completely equal. Black can play a5, black can play queen c7. But bishop c7 is a little bit of a nervous move. I mean, again, it's not worth it to analyze this because we're playing with less than 10 seconds on the clock. But yeah, bishop b6, I didn't even realize that this was on pre. I play queen e4 and I'm attacking h7 now. They should have played g6, but then more nervousness stroke. Thank you for the game. And I think we will not get the chance of playing one more game. Oh, wait a second. Oh, okay. Let me just cancel this. Oh no. Okay, I'm gonna play one more game, but I'm gonna berserk because I like keeping these streams at a reasonable length. So they play knight c6. We're once again going to strike with the delayed Alapin. Let's see if our opponent goes for d5. They do. So now we're going to get some sort of French. If anything, we're probably transposing directly to the French. And they go for an early f6. And I mean, I think there are different ways of playing here. I'm going to play bishop b5. Hitting the knight. I'm quite sure bishop e2 was fine. Probably bishop d3. Knight c3. But yeah. They go for this. It doesn't look very right because now I get to take and force black to take with a pawn. And maybe there's sometimes there's ideas like knight h4 and queen h5 in these positions. But first things first, I'm going to castle. I'm going to finish development. Now knight h4 looks very attractive, and I think I can't resist. Queen h5, knight g6, knight takes g6 is a super threat. So black has to address that in some way. Is now on pre, and the pawn on d5 is also on pre, so one of them is going to fall. But I'm okay with that. I think I'm willing to sacrifice that pawn on d4 because that king is on d8. Look at that. So they go knight takes d4. I'm gonna take on d7 just to keep things coming, not wasting time. I've sacrificed the pawn. I have to play energetically. So I'm going to continue with that philosophy. I'm going to play rook d1, putting pressure on d4. I'm creating threats every single move. They play knight c6, but this is a little bit of an impulsive move. My opponent's not using their time. My opponent sees me berserking, and sure, I am running out of time, and I'm not the best in terms of time management. But on the flip side, they're missing tactics like knight takes d5, and I think now things are crumbling. I think if black had played... Okay, I don't want to waste my time, but we're going to take a look at that in the postmortem. I think there must be a way for black to equalize there, or at least be a little bit more resilient. Okay, so this knight on h4 is not doing anything. This queen could come to f7, and I like that actually. But then king c8. So you know what? I'm going to put my rook on c1. I'm going to activate this rook. And the idea is that, for example, maybe I'm threatening something like bishop takes d4, after which we get very nice lines actually. Knight takes d4, queen f7, and all of a sudden king c8 is illegal. I mean, there are many other lines. Sorry about that. There are other beautiful lines. For example, queen f7, king c8, bishop takes d4, e takes d4. I mean, I'm already thinking about rook takes c6 and then rook c1, but okay, I don't think it works. At least not for now. But, you know, like, if I continue bringing my pieces into the game, that king on d7 is eventually going to be too much of a weakness, too much of a responsibility to keep up with. And black eventually is going to pay the price. So now my opponent's thinking, this is something my coach used to tell me all the time. Like, my opponent's finally slowing down, but it's too late now. Because, you have already a lost position. You should have taken your time much earlier. Okay, I'm going to play knight f5. This move is looking to get rid of black's blockade of the d file. So now I'm threatening to take on d4. If they take, I take, check, and I think black has to only move king e8, and then I would have played maybe queen e6, threatening knight takes f6, but they go king e6, which is a very funny looking move. I mean, it is putting pressure on the knights, but there's no way this is working. So the first move that comes to mind is knight takes d4, e takes d4, and then something there. Something there. Well, what is that something? Okay, we don't have any infinite time. Takes is also possible. Taking here is also possible. Goodness gracious. Takes. Can take here. I mean, so many options. All of them look very attractive. I think I'm gonna opt for takes on d4, check. Black has to take on d4. Anything else looks horrible. They take with the knight. And I think here, once again, I mean, I can sacrifice the exchange. I can go bishop takes d4. I can go knight c7. I think knight c7 is probably the best. I'm gonna go knight c7 check. Queen takes c7, rook takes c7, obviously. Black has to step to the d file, after which I'm simply breaking through the d file. And that's game over. My opponent resigns. Thank you for the game. Hopefully that was instructive. Let's just analyze this. Actually, we managed to do this on time. Almost perfect timing, actually. So they went e6. Once again, black. My opponent haven't been playing the most typical, more common d5. After which I'm taking and playing d4, and okay, there are many interesting ways of playing for black. Black is actually getting a decent game if they know what they're doing. But they went for e6, and we get to this. It's essentially a French now. They go for f6. I went bishop b5. This is a little bit of a rare line. I think it's a little bit more usual for white to put the bishop on d3 or on e2. But given that black applies pressure against e5 quickly, I thought, well, I might as well indirectly address that situation with bishop b5. Now I get to take back with my knight, for instance, on e5 after f6, e5. And I took on f6, and now I weakened the king. That was okay. According to the engine, we could have also kept the tension. This would have been even better. But okay, this is very human, and this is reasonable. This is also very giving white a good position, and bishop d7 is already a mistake. According to the engine, bishop g7 followed by causes short side, and this is, yeah, it's kind of masking black's weakness on the king side, but okay, it's doing it pretty well with pieces, defending the king with pieces. But after bishop d7, yeah, this is looking very ugly already. Black already has to play very accurately with bishop g7, queen h5, and king f8 to kind of hold on. But they fail and they play queen b6, and now things are a little bit more difficult. Like, once again, bishop e8, they have to play accurately, but okay, knight takes d4, and this is a very logical move because it's taking a pawn, but it happens to be a blunder. I take on d7, king takes d7, bishop e3. This is pinned. Yeah. So I was wrong. I was wrong by saying that there was probably a way for black to put more resistance here without blundering the pawn on d5, but it's unfortunately too weak. The black's position is too weak. The king is in the middle. I mean, the engine line is rook c8, but even after this, we're taking on d5. So yeah, the opening didn't go very well for my opponent. And after knight c7, just to show what could have happened, like rook takes d4, and all my pieces are playing. Black's pieces are all in the 8th rank except for the bishop, but there's already forced mate here after bishop d6, and okay, let's try to find it without the engine. Where's the mate here? Queen f5. So king c8 is obviously illegal. Same with king c7 and king c6 because of the rook on c1. Is there a mate here? I mean, we can continue taking 1,000 pieces, but I'm quite sure there's a mate here. Where is it? Queen f7. Check. There we go. This is a mate. And if they go to e5, obviously this is, I mean, this has to be some mate. Okay, we don't have to do it until mate, but there's like, I don't know, queen e4, check, and I don't know, this. Thank you. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it a lot. Hopefully it was useful. Thanks everyone for watching. Hopefully, as I said, there were some lessons to be learned there. And have fun with the bullet arena. I think actually it already started, if anything. Let me just see who's playing, because it's always very exciting to see who's playing. There we go. The iconic, mythic legend Penguin. Well, he's probably gonna win. I don't see any decent okay, Nihalsarin is playing, never mind. Okay, well, thanks everyone. I'll be around and probably streaming tomorrow.